Hi, I'm Greg Schaffer, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. Andrew Staton joins us today. He is a cybersecurity professional out of Huntsville and a good friend of mine, and glad to be able to catch up. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Greg and I said this before we started recording, but it's great to get to hang out and visit with you. It has been too long since we've gotten to connect.
Yes, and I know a lot has happened since the last time that we spoke, and I'm sure we'll catch up with this in the podcast, but the last time that we saw each other in person was during the National Cyber Summit in Huntsville a year ago, because I know both you and I were not able to make it this year around, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So, but I know some of your story, but I know most of the folks out there don't. I'd like to hear, starting from the beginning. It's like, how and why did you get into this wonderful field of cybersecurity? And just bring us up to what you're doing today.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one of the things that's unique about my story. So growing up here in Huntsville, Alabama, I've been here in Huntsville pretty much my whole life. My mom and dad moved here when I was 6 months old because mom took a Windows system administrator job at Marshall Space Flight Center.
Oh,
So I actually was taught how to use a computer, a lot of computer hardware components, how to work my way around the machine by my mom. So um, really growing up, I always had a good exposure to technology and computing. And there was always just something fascinating about, how computers worked and functioned, what technology was doing. So really just kind of being here in Huntsville came up during a bit of a technological renaissance. So my family had been here in Huntsville and in this area for ages. So when I was coming up into high school was when the local city schools started to actually do a cybersecurity trade program. And you had several instructors that came in from local industry to teach us kind of hands-on keyboard, how to do simple things such as, okay, how do we harden a Windows machine? What the heck do you do to configure a Linux box using command line? Cisco routing was beat into me by several instructors um, from the time I was in high school. And it was done with the intent purpose that, by the time you graduated high school, that if you wanted to go and get a job on the help desk working, entry level here in town, you could do so. They aligned the courses to a lot of the DoD 8570 certifications. So in high school, I had the opportunity to test for like the Network Plus, the IT fundamentals, and a couple other things there. And while doing that, was involved with CyberPatriot, which is a hands-on, really more of a computer forensics, computer hardening competition that's put on by the Air Force Association. And just kind of fell in love with the hands-on keyboard and the impact of it. While in high school, I also was really encouraged to continue and pursue a career in cybersecurity. While I spent 2 summers on staff with Fellowship of Christian Athletes of North Alabama. Here as a first year, I was, an intern working with some of the students at some of the sports camps. Second year, I did a lot of the audio visual tech stuff for the ministry. And was encouraged. In one of my defining career moments, I was really tempted to kind of give up on going into cyber, was just really discouraged. And you had a retired NFL football player, a guy by the name of Devin Weinman, who I love that. I remember sitting there, I'm like, man, I'm just a tech geek. I'm not good for much else beyond that. And I remember Devin, who, larger than me, is one of the few men I have to physically look up to, got very angry with me and was like, man, you don't talk about yourself that way. And, encouraged me. So I went from there, graduated from Grissom High School here in Huntsville, and went to J.F. Drake State Community and Technical College here, got an associate's degree. And while I would say the second year of my associates, I got picked up by a local small MSP. And from there, kind of the rest is history. I just continued to be involved in the local cyber ecosystem. And from there, just kept kind of moving up. So I've gotten to work and manage service providers that are super small, for an MSP that's a bit larger. Worked for a large Fortune 100 company doing internal cybersecurity compliance work within their federal business unit. And right now I work for a smaller boutique cybersecurity consulting firm that's very much involved in the federal ecosystem and helping clients to, really navigate all the challenges that come with CMMC and various other federal cyber and data protection regulations.
I think it's so smart that Huntsville did that. I didn't know that part about your backstory, that because looking at the local economy, that they tailored for high school students. You see this a lot in colleges sometimes, but not necessarily in high school, that they tailored programs to get folks like you started and up and running. Now, I know you're a success from that program and from the CyberPatriot program as well. But are the high schools in Huntsville, are they still doing that sort of initiative? And do you know like what kind of a success rate they have like for placement?
So right now, one of the things that's interesting, so here in Huntsville, when they initially set up the CyberPatriot program when I was in school, you only had two of the high schools that were really doing it at first. It was Grissom High School, which resides physically here in South Huntsville. And then you had New Century Technology School, which was a magnet school that you had to apply to, were the only ones doing it. Over the past couple of years, that has been expanded to where, to best of my knowledge and belief, all of the high schools here in Madison County have access to a CyberPatriot team. Many of them have cybersecurity instructors that will teach them. And you even have at the middle school level, people that are teaching hands-on basics of computing.
Wow.
Actually, one of my favorite public speaking engagements I ever did was you have a teacher, Mr. D'Angelo, over at Hampton Cove Middle School, and I got to take a whole day basically and did Ask Me Anything sessions with his middle school students. Like, man, if you have a question about cyber, throw it out. If you're curious about something you saw on TV or in a movie, like throw it out. Let's talk about that. And you have a very, very blossoming relationship between the public schools and with the industry. And
yeah, I mean, that's great for Huntsville, particularly since, I mean, for those who don't know anything about Huntsville, and there may be some out there, but it's like, space capital of the world. Space Force is now going to be there as far as their headquarters go. Big history there as far as development with the space program. Great museum there and all that. I think one of the only two remaining never flown Saturn V rockets is there in Huntsville, which if you walk under this thing, because they have it laid out in a building like on its side, and you walk under it, it's like, yeah, it's pretty big. But it's funny you mentioned about, as you were telling that story about, talking about schools and middle schools, I'm like, well, not much had changed in the last few years, because when I was in middle school, it was my first exposure to computers. And now back then it was 1978, and I was exposed to a teletype machine that connected to a mainframe in Tarrytown, New York, a few towns over, and we got to play tic-tac-toe and to do our first basic programming, which everybody who's done basic, the first program is line 10. Print hello, line 20, go to 10. It just prints hello over and over and over again. So I kind of dated myself a little bit there. But, for those who are talking about in the cybersecurity industry that we don't have like enough talent out there, this would seem to be a great pipeline that other communities could adopt, right?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that has been, I know my dad for a bit of time. So my dad's been involved with Civil Air Patrol for years. I mean, he's been a part of that organization since he was a teenager. So Dad, one of the things that I've heard him talk about is, from a generational perspective, my dad's family is from, from Appalachia. So they, Dad's family were a bunch of truckers and coal miners, and just through CyberPatriot in the public school and the education, what that does from being able to find a job, to find employment, to even if I wanted to pivot, like having some of the foundational knowledge from that program is useful in any career space. Is, CyberPatriot's a tool that just with education and experience helps to lift people up out of potential impoverished situations where, like there's a buddy of mine locally who went to one of the Title I schools here in town and was part of CyberPatriot, went and got a degree. And right now, one of my favorite conversations was him sitting, we're talking, he's like, man, because of CyberPatriot and because of the investment in local industry, my kids and my wife aren't going to stress and worry about any of the things I stressed growing up, in terms of being
that's
able to
good.
put food on the table, being able to pay
Yeah.
for rent, being able to live, take care of, God forbid, you break your arm, have to go to the hospital. Like, it's
That's
one of those resources that changes lives if if people take advantage of it properly.
I think that's great. And it also helps, I mean, it helps the industry as well, too. You were talking about defense industry. So I did want to pivot and talk just a little bit about that because, a lot's happened, particularly with CMMC, now becoming finally, we're going to see it in more and more contracts and all that. And I think we got some SMBs that are small and mid-sized businesses that are still either their head might be in the ground, like ignoring that it's still out there, or that they're begrudgingly starting to realize, okay, if I'm going to earn or be part of the federal ecosystem, I really got to pay attention to this thing. Well, what is from your view and your experience in the field, what is one of the most prevalent misconceptions that SMBs have with regards to talking about compliance? I'm focused more in the federal sector, but I mean, you can talk about outside of that as well.
Yeah. It's, I would say, the first kind of misconception I would see, especially like right now with CMMC, starting November 10th with the conclusion of rulemaking, you'll start to see contracting officers can put CMMC requirements in their contracts requiring certification, that you have to pass an external audit and external assessment to be able to do business. And, simultaneously, what I've kind of seen from businesses that, the first thing I've heard from a lot of SMBs across years of experience is that, there's a bit of a panic. So, you hear from, small little manufacturing shop that, they have been used to, hey, we run our machines, we can cut the parts, we QA them, and it's a lot of blue collar types that will look, and the minute you put NIST 800 171 in front of them, there's a bit of, kind of a cat rearing up where it's like, oh my, what am I going to do? How do I handle this? How do I, navigate the increased costs? How do I navigate what this does to our workflow? And, the first thing I wish within the kind of the CMMC ecosystem, if I could make one change, is I wish there was more of an effort that when we engage with, especially businesses that might be a little behind the 8 ball at this point, that we approach it from a perspective of a little bit of grace of, okay, you know what? If you're a small to medium-sized business receiving any work, either from a prime contractor or directly from the Department of Defense, the best time to start it with CMMC would have probably been, based off average time to implement, 12 to 18 months ago. Because that's about the average time it takes to implement all the technology, develop the policies, do everything you need to be ready. But I would say if you hadn't started the prep then, I would say the next best thing to emphasize to our small to medium-sized businesses is, hey, you guys can start today.
Well, it's like planting a tree. When is the best time to plant a tree? The first best time is yesterday. The second best time is today. So, or the first best time is 10 years ago. But
exactly. And I also think that a lot of companies will start and they look at first step like, okay, we have to make a whole infrastructure swap, and they start looking at, okay, what MSP, what company can we hire to fix the problem for us? And one of the things that drives up the cost of compliance with CMMC is your data scoping. So with my current employer, one of the first projects we do, and one of the things, my CEO, Ryan Bonner, is known for is, hey, let's actually take a look at the data you receive. Let's figure out the reality of, okay, where is your CUI coming into the environment? Where is it exiting the environment? And trying to take a bit of a common sense approach of, let's figure out what you have first before we start building a technical solution or developing policies and procedures. Just because if you can limit the technological scope, that can help you to decrease the cost of implementing all the controls of, if you're wanting to use a cloud solution, the cost of going to GCC high, it's a lot more affordable if you're a company of 100 users. If if the reality is only 20, 30 employees need to access, are touching, receiving, storing, processing, transmitting CUI, it's a lot cheaper to implement that enclave for 20 to 30 users than the full 100 in your enterprise.
Right. Well, and there's a precedence for this, a roadmap, if you will, that we can follow, and that's with PCI. Because PCI, we say, what's one of the first tenets in PCI is define your scope, because PCI only applies to that scope for, where is your cardholder data, which the equivalent here is where is CUI, and then to your point, it's like you only have to worry about implementing the controls necessary in that scoped area. That's not to say that you don't want to implement controls outside of that. Obviously you do, but you want to do it commensurate to the risk. And here we're talking not just information risk, but also compliance risk. So how well do SMBs receive or even understand the idea of scoping like that?
I would say it really depends on size. I've seen some small, medium-sized businesses that they're on top of it. They know the data, they know what they get, and they're able to tell us, hey, here's the data we're getting from the prime contractor. Here's the CUI data type classification. Here is the data classification guide we've gotten from the federal government for this. But I would say by and far, I wouldn't say a majority, but there's a good part of the defense industrial base that, when they get data in, the attitude tends to be that, I've heard this a lot, is, hey, we need to treat what data we receive from the federal government as CUI. And one of my personal kind of pet peeves is that something either is controlled unclassified information or CUI,
or it's not.
Or it's not.
Right.
There isn't really at least from a letter of the regulation, there isn't a ton of room to sit there and go, hey, your contract, when given, or if you give any information, so let's say if you give an SF-86 as a DoD contractor, you give that to the federal government, they're going to mark that as CUI because to the government it is. But if they give that document back to you, it's not CUI. It's your own data. It's also one of those things, CUI is a wide-ranging term. So if you go and look at the National Archives, their CUI registry, you think, hey, CUI exists, and it can be anything that we put on a weapon system or we make as part of a defense contract that goes in a broader thing. But if you look at the National Archives, if you have, for law enforcement purposes, if there are any, sexually illicit photographs that are collected and maintained, those can fit a CUI category. If you're working a archaeological dig pertaining to anything, with any of the Native American dig sites that exist around the US, and if you take technical scan data, you can technically put a CUI category to that data. There's even, if you have, old historic landmarks and data that reside on National Registry of Historic Buildings, those can fall in a CUI classification and registry. So it's one of those things that if you are a small business doing any sort of federal contracting work, first thing I'd encourage is look at the data and make sure it actually aligns to what the National Archives has in their CUI registry within the defense subcategory, or what DoD has as their CUI types.
Now, this is a side question that totally unrelated, but can you call it DoD anymore? Does it have to be now DOW?
I mean, what's sad is, Greg, that's a good call out, because I've been so used to calling it DoD since.
I know, we're always going to call it DoD. It's like,
so I have a feeling that the branding change there. I'm hoping people won't take a stick and beat me over the head with it. But
well, I'm not beating you over the head with it. It's just something that came to mind. I'm like, I don't know if I can adjust to that anymore. But
I mean,
well, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I've heard people have been using the two interchangeably. So that's been the approach I've been attempting, to adopt, has been, what, if I'm using DoD or DOW, we're talking about the same branch of the federal government that handles all of our armed services and things that go boom.
Yeah. I don't know if that's going to end up being an issue or not, but it's like it's definitely something that I think I'm going to be more cognizant, like reading things, and maybe like on LinkedIn, I might just like troll folks and just say, don't you mean Dow instead of Dodd?
Yeah, like
I would do that just to mess with people, but I want to pivot back to something else, and this is actually really important to me. And I know you mentioned it to me when we were first talking about doing the podcast scheduling. And just as a bit of background, folks that are familiar with the podcast know that I spend the third segment talking about how to keep yourself healthy, because it's very stressful in our industry. And that genesis of that question comes from when I was CISO for, well, at the time it was Metro Nashville, which was a very stressful job for me, which was also not the most fulfilling at the time. And I internalized the stress, and the only way that I really dealt with it is that I probably overconsumed. Wasn't an alcoholic, but was a self-medicator without a doubt, which is not the correct way to do it. And it also kept me away from God. And that's why I ultimately quit drinking, is because I realized whenever I would be like wanting to decompress, I should be praying instead of drinking. But you are working on developing a talking more extensively about mental health for cyber professionals. I'd love to hear more about that, where you're going with that, and really just some more details that can help others as well.
Yeah. So a bit of background, and if for people that are watching the podcast, you can go and look on my LinkedIn and see. But for me, I've always struggled over years with my own mental and physical health. So one of the things that's part of my story is, I grew up in a split household. My parents got a divorce when I was in middle school. And, even when I was younger in third grade, my family, we went through an apartment fire and we lost everything. So
Oh man.
as a response to those different traumas, I took to eating good food as a coping mechanism. And, it was one of those things that if, I'd always had been big. At my heaviest, I weighed about 550 pounds.
Wow.
And, like it was one of those things that, I already I want to say predisposed to having those issues. But, growing up with some of the just life experience and just kind of trauma inherent to those things, growing up with living through, the wreckage of an apartment fire and a parent's divorce, it's going to take a toll on any kid. I don't care how well adjusted or, how well off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then throwing into that, pursuing a career in cybersecurity and such, I was predisposed. And, so from high school, I was really heavy. And then coming and started working in cybersecurity. And, when I was stressed at work, I would just sit there and go, man, I'm going to go eat, and I'm going to eat a good bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that became a coping mechanism. And then, I would say a little over a year ago, probably towards, and I'd had a couple spurs where I had tried to do stuff to lose weight and better my health, but would start that would go for 4-6 months and then would just sputter and I'd regain the weight back. And, one of the things that for me is trying to figure out the mental health piece was, okay, if I want to be better mentally and be better in my spiritual health, Greg, you and I've talked a little offline. We come from the same or very similar Christian faith backgrounds. I needed to be willing to take care of myself.
Right.
So, for me, it was started to really make some adjustments. So part of the impetus for this talk I'm developing, and Lord willing, I'll be able to have finished and submitted a conference here in the near future, really came from like, man, what are some things I wish I would have known as a junior IT and cybersecurity professional to help? And, one of the things that's key to that is, as a cybersecurity professional, it is great for us to have community. Like I'm a part of the North Alabama ISSA chapter. I love the ISSA chapter. I love my technical peers here in Cyber Huntsville. But you need to have a grounding in community, to have some human elements that pull us away from the computer screen, away from the world of endless vulnerabilities and CVEs or
Yep.
changing regulation and landscape, to help ground us that, hey, the world, you know what? Right outside our windows today, the sun's shining. There is hopefully grass growing. You know, Greg, you and I are here in the South, so we're in the false fall number 2 at this point.
Yeah, it's like 80
back up.
degrees outside right now. It's like, it's wonderful, but it's like, yeah, it's false fall. Well, we went from, I guess it's still summer number 3, maybe we could call it too. So
I mean, it'll go back and forth, and we might get a week of fall late November, and then it's just going to be freezing.
Yep.
So, it was really, for me, a lot of that talk's kind of trying to take a look back and reflect at, okay, to Andrew at 18 years old, what do I wish I would have known that could have helped me to not avoid some of the issues, but to better equip and tackle them?
Well, I know that it's interesting that you frame it that way, and so I'm going to walk down that path for a moment. If I was to talk to my younger self, um, and I had some similar experiences. My parents divorced when I was 3 or 4 or something like that, so I kind of always grew up in that environment. It was normal to me. For my middle brother, it was harder because he was older. But I know for me, uh, I was very insecure, and if I could go back in time, some of the things that I thought were so important weren't, particularly when you're a teenager. And teenagers, I don't know how teenagers today do it, with the pressures of social media and all of that. I know for me, growing up as a teenager in the 70s and 80s, it was difficult. But a lot of the difficulty was me putting pressure on myself. I didn't really need to. I think maybe, they talk about being comfortable in your own self, in your own shell, of who you are. Is that one thing that comes to mind with regards to mental health?
Absolutely. One of the things that I had always been kind of ashamed of, physically, my body, how I looked, how I was perceived.
Mhm.
In high school, that was a major issue, and even in college. And like, one of the things that was a bit of I don't want to say a lie, but in my one of the factors in the back of my head when I went and had the bariatric surgery last year to try to help me, give me a tool and resource to lose the weight and start to keep the weight off, was that, man, once I lose the weight, the self-confidence issues, that stuff's going to go away. And one of the things, so for context, right now I weigh about 250 pounds.
You say you're
So,
half the man than when I last saw you. We were
yeah.
talking about that before we started recording, and I'm like, no, you always be a full person to me. It's just
But
like, but I know what you mean. It's like,
yeah.
that's amazing.
And like, one of the things that was interesting is, like, now at the weight I'm at, like, me and my wife, we've had conversations with our marital counselor about, for me, one of the things I'm having to adjust to is body dysmorphia. Like, I'd spent years being so used to that. Okay, I had rather large hands, and there
Mhm.
was a lot of, like, the button up I'm wearing here. There was a point where, just to kind of show a bit, like, at the base of my wrist, it was tight up here, and having to mentally adjust to that shift physically, that, okay, how I carry myself physically isn't the same.
Mm.
And one of the things that I've had to continuously remind myself, and and I say this to peers similarly in cybersecurity circles that might struggle with, hey, I'm not doing well in my job, or hey, I'm struggling with the shifting regulations, or man, I've got a client that's just kicking my tail. Is that, for us all in the cybersecurity community, and really just as human beings, our worth isn't defined by how we look. It's not
Yes.
defined by what we do. Like, Greg, at the end of the day, you and I, we could have our titles taken away from us here at this moment. But our worth isn't found in that. For us two, our worth is defined by our faith.
Well, and it's I'm glad that you walked down that path, because as you were talking, and I'd already formulated in my mind, doing what you're not supposed to do. It's like, okay, what am I going to say next while you're still talking that? But I did do that. Um, I wanted to say, in all honesty, it's like I mean, I recognize that you were a big person. Don't get me wrong, but I never saw that.
Mhm.
It was like with you, I've always known you as, first and foremost, a very nice, approachable person. Second, a cybersecurity professional. And then third, when we started to talk about faith stuff, a brother in Christ. And then these are the things that, when I think about Andrew, that define. Physically never came into play. I mean, it's not denying it. It's just that there was no importance with it. And I think that you're right. We get so hung up on one little thing that we lose the sight, no pun intended, of what other people perceive you as. And that is such a key to gaining or regaining that healthy mental aspect.
Absolutely. And it's also one of the things that, I will say that it's understated in, like as a cybersecurity professional, being able to get outside of our bubble and engage with our community around us does a lot for mental health. One of the things that you'll see if I move out of the way, I have a bunch of model kits there.
I noticed
And
that, yes.
and I actually picked that up in 2019 when I was working my first real job in cybersecurity and IT. My therapist at the time recommended, "Hey, Andrew, why don't you pick up, model kit building? Try doing something with your hands that's tangible. That if you want to throw on, a sermon, he recommended a couple faith-based podcasts, or some various worship music playlists. Like, do something with your hands while nourishing your soul, and that." Something that I still will do as a coping mechanism. That's actually I will say hobby, potentially addiction, depending on who you ask. But me and my wife actually have a bunch of model kits that we build and work on together, just because for both of us, being able to do something with our hands that has tangible results helps to unwind. I also, nowadays, I spend some good bit of time volunteering at a local nursing home and do some prayer service type stuff with some of the residents. And one of the things that's nourishing just to me as a professional is, getting to sit with some older people that have different life experiences and hearing stories. One of my favorite things, and I'll tell you, when I was talking with some clients, they asked about, man, what's the highlight of your week been? It was, I was pastoring 2 churches here in North Alabama at the time. And we were doing Holy Week services at a nursing home and did a Monday, Thursday serve. I can't remember if it was Monday, Thursday, or Good Friday, but it was me, and yet one of my close friends came over to help me with the service, and we pulled and did I think it was Good Friday, and we pulled an older liturgical service from an Anglican Common Book of Prayer, just because we wanted to try to find some worship style that was close to what the residents may have grown up with. And we got to sit after service, and man, the service was great. Had a lot of fun. My favorite part of it was after church. One of the residents there grew up, and she was a kid in England during the Blitz in World War II. So she sat there and was telling us stories about, what it was like during the evacuations, the bombing raids. And one of my favorite moments was, sitting there, and she looked at me. And, and I was wearing a clerical collar. So she looked at me and she's like, "You want to know the worst thing about it, Reverend?" And I'm like, "What's that, ma'am?" She's like, "I went through all that nonsense and I didn't even get to go to Narnia." Referring to, she took her story and immediately recontextualized it that, okay, me and my buddy, we probably knew the closest impression till we had heard her stories was, the opening of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And, if as a security professional, being able to get outside of the digital realm and connect with humanity around us, with other human beings, I mean, that is the greatest bit of mental health advice I can give is, man, find some time to mentor some students. Go visit with some of the, your local nursing home. Find something.
Yeah, get outside of your even your security folk bubble. Get these stories like the one you just told, and the stories that both young and old can provide. I know for me, it's like I've been very good, fortunately, in my career, is that I don't look upon someone younger than me as like inferior just because they have less life experience. Because quite honestly, they have more life experience in almost every area of life, because nobody has the same path in life. So,
Yeah.
so talking about path in life, what's coming up for you? What kind of special plans you got coming up?
Well, so I got married in the past, 6 months. So right now,
Congratulations.
I would say right now the big focus on life has been, for me, it had been, in addition to continuing to better my physical and mental, spiritual health, was, really, really trying to make sure that me and my wife get settled in, that, we're laying a solid foundation for our marriage. And, that has been that has been priority number one for me. That's because it's one of those things that if I didn't take the time to be willing to sit and recognize that, hey, this is a major life change, we need to be able to walk through and enjoy that season. That can cause some major headaches down the road. It's one of the things that's been interesting with that's been, I started my job at DefCert. So 6 months ago, started at DefCert, me and my wife moved into, or got a house, and then we got married all in the span of a couple weeks. So, there's been a lot of life change. One of the things I'm hoping with, I now have a little bit more bandwidth. So I've got some projects that I've had on the back burner that I've wanted to do. Wanting to do a talk on mental health, really kind of the nexus between cybersecurity and mental and spiritual health. Like, okay, what are the things that if a security practitioner is trying to look for resourcing to help them better their mental health, or things that can help them, navigate the crises in the world around us, that could help with that. And, that's something that's been really, really kind of burning on my heart and in the back of my mind. So other than that, I mean, I'm hoping at some point, I think, Greg, we first met at B-Sides Nashville when I first started working on a little thing called Roll for Instant Response, which was a conversion of D&D 5th edition to NIST 861. I believe 61 is the Instant Response Handler's Guide. If I'm wrong on that citation, I trust LinkedIn will call me out.
I'm not going to edit this. I'm just saying.
Yeah. But want to pick that back up and actually flesh that out as a full educational resource and try to make that available to the local school, school and resources and practitioners, just because, man, tabletop exercises that are slideshow and death by PowerPoint, you might be able to satisfy the compliance checkbox and you might get some actionable data. But if you're able to actually engage your audience, I find that you get a lot better, not just data to work with and remediate, but it's also a lot more pleasant to get genuine engagement and buy-in from all parties involved.
Yeah, because you need that. That's the whole deal. It's like checking the box is great and fine and necessary, but getting the engagement, building the muscle memory is so important with tabletops. I know we could spend a whole nother podcast on that. I almost did ask a tabletop question, but I'm like, no, I wanted to pivot into the mental health. Yeah. Well, I got to say, Andrew, it's just been an absolute pleasure catching up. The one thing I will say about marriage is that you lay the foundation, but also recognize that people change and sometimes not at the same rate. So it's communication and God, but not in that order. It's God and communication. That's the secret sauce. Everything after that just becomes gravy. So I appreciate you coming on. Sorry we didn't get a chance for both of our reasons to not catch up in Huntsville at National Cyber Summit. But one of these days I'm going to be back down there. It's just down the road from me. It's about an hour and a half down 65. So looking forward to chatting again in person sometime. And congratulations on the marriage, and congratulations on the health initiatives and everything that you're doing.
Absolutely. Greg, it's great to catch up with you. And I know me and Emma, we actually have some plans to go up to Nashville here in the next few months. So I'll
the next time you're up, make sure. Yes, let me know. And, on the way up, you'll pass by Franklin. That's where I'm at. And maybe we'll get a chance to catch a cup of coffee or something. So
sounds good.
Well, thanks again, Andrew. And everybody, stay secure.